What's up guys, welcome to the review show where I'm talking all about TV shows. Getting straight into it because that's what you want. Hanna Season 2. So Hanna Season 2 continues off from Season 1 obviously, but it is a remake or reimagining of the film Hanna. Here in Season 2 she's without her mentor now, she's on the run, and basically this season I think is a little bit better than Season 1. Just a little bit. One of the problems with this show, I think, is pacing. The pacing is on the slower side. This season does fix that a bit, and it's a much more brisker season. There are 8 episodes, each one's about 50 minutes roughly, and yeah, I think this one really focuses in on Hanna and what her ultimate goal is, what her mission is now that she's on the run, that she is, what's next for her. And it quickly establishes that. There's this group that's being trained and raised just like her. In fact, she was one of them until she was taken away from them. So she's now trying to help them and rescue them with a specific focus on rescuing one of them in particular. The problem I have here is that a lot of the characters aren't that interesting. Hanna herself isn't that interesting. In fact, Hanna I actually think is now becoming the least interesting part of the show. Nothing against the performance, nothing against the actor. I just don't think they actually given her much to do. The first half I think they do, where she is like sneaking around trying to get answers, where she's trying to break into like the pharmaceutical company to get some answers, to find out what's going on. That stuff's all interesting, very spy, very thriller-esque. But then the second half of the season, where it focuses in on this like manor house where they are all living, and you're never sure she's undercover or if she's actually going along with them. It feels like they run out of things for her to do, so should they just put her there to experience what everyone else is going through. I'm not going to go into too much spoilers. But this season I do think it's a little bit better than the first. I think there are some good action scenes this season, but this season also has fewer action scenes than the first season. I would say this season is much more of a drama than an action show now. They introduce a new bad guy played by Dermot Mulroney. He's quite good, but again, I couldn't tell you much about his character. There's a much more focus on the other girls in this like academy situation where they are building them up, exploring them, and dealing with like what their lives must be like, because they aren't normal children, they haven't had normal lives, they've been born and raised to be spies, to be killers essentially. And I think it all builds up pretty well where some of them are thriving in their roles, who are loving what they're doing and realizing, oh, this is what I was born to do, therefore I'll do it. Others are a bit more apprehensive about it all and a bit more like, oh, I've been raised to do this, I've been told to do this, but do I really want to? And it explores some of that quite well. There's one exploration of this element though which I just wasn't sold on at all, where they give them false identities and basically say, oh, here's your fake family, here's what you did in your life, fake style. And one of the characters goes headfirst into this and is like, oh wow, I had this life, I've done all these things, I have a sister. It's like, no you didn't, this is all fake. It's very clear that this character knows it's fake, and yet they're acting as if it's real. And it's weird. Other characters try to get into this character's head to try and understand what this character's going through, but the show never does a good job of explaining it. It's very clearly that all these characters are being given false backgrounds and false families and relationships, and they're messaging this one individual who they know isn't actually who they're speaking to. So she's like contacting her fake mother, who they know is actually just someone working in the academy. And yet this person's fully in belief of this, who fully feels like, oh, this is her mother. Yet she knows it's not. It's weird. It's like, the best way I can describe it is, she's going along with this thing that she knows is fake, that she knows isn't real, just because she wants to. And yeah, they never sell me on it. And that's the biggest problem I've got with this whole season of the show, is every time they try to explain the lifestyles of these girls and what these girls are going through, and it kind of fails at certain points. Ultimately, I think the season progresses really well. I like the final episode, for example. I like how things all come together in the final 2 episodes, where they are building up the tension, they give the girls a mission, and Hannah's there trying to fix things up and keep certain characters alive and get out of certain other situations. It all works really well. I don't know what's going to happen in season 3. I think season 3 could end up just being more of the same, and I think that's going to be a risk. But ultimately, Hanna season 2, a little bit better than season 1. A little bit more focused than season 1. Next show I'm going to talk about is The Umbrella Academy season 2. Right from the word go, I'm going to say this is better than season 1. Season 1 I thought was good. This one I think was borderline great. It seems like in season 1 there were a few little issues to do with like pacing and the length of the show and so on. And the tone as well, which was a bit moodier and broodier and things were slower. This season they've seemed to have focused in on what worked in season 1 and what didn't work in season 1, and they've corrected things. So what worked in season 1, they've doubled down on them. What didn't work in season 1, they've practically got rid of this time around to make season 2 almost a must-watch superhero show, I would say. This time around the characters have avoided the apocalypse, but in a weird situation they've been transported to the 60s, albeit in different times in the 60s. So one of them got there a year earlier than the others and so on. They've now established new lives for themselves in the 60s. Vanya has got no memory of what happened, and one of them's now involved in political stuff, and one of them's now in a mental asylum, and one of them's working as a bodyguard and a fighter for some gangster. This season, all of the characters have these weird, quirky lives going on around them. They're really fascinating, really interesting. There's an element of comedy to each and every one of them. Some of them are awkward and weird. Some of them, they're all awkward and weird in their own ways, and makes them very lovable, very likable. I think the standouts have to be Five and Klaus, who are Five, despite being only 16 years old, I think in real life, is he's something to keep an eye on, I think. He's the one that pulls this show whole together. He's the one that's progressing the story. He's the one that's the most like straight-faced and serious of the lot, because he's much more focused on the real threats, the real incidents. He's the one that's trying to get everyone together again, because hey, these people, they can't avoid the apocalypse. Apparently there's another one coming. They showed in the first season, the show often felt like a bit of a music video at times, when it would come down to certain action moments and big elements where it would hit to a song, and hey, there you go, all of a sudden you're having a really fun time with this soundtrack behind you. This show now doubles down on that. There are some really cool action scenes, really good use of songs and music in here. There's one use of a song which I did not like at all. It's a cover of a popular song from last year, and it just did not work for me. The action scene which is in is pretty good itself, just the song itself I did not like. Of course that's going to be a subjective thing. The villains this time around are much more engaging. The villain is a continuation from the first season, but they've added a new element. There's a new character in here who, it starts off as one thing, it ends up as another, without spoiling it. There are numerous twists and turns, numerous big action moments, lots of comedy. Because it's on Netflix, this show isn't afraid to push things, so there is some grisly, dark humour, there is some grisly, dark action in there, a lot of blood and guts at times, but it also feels like it's very accessible to viewers, if you don't mind the blood and guts sometimes. The way in which it deals with the fact that it's in the 60s, they've got a great use of costumes and lighting and colour in there. They're dealing with some strong themes which are very relevant today, all to do with like racism and sexism and homophobia and all that stuff that's very relevant now, which was also relevant back then. They handle these themes really well, and I'm really interested to see where season 3 goes. They end this season like they did in the first season, where there is a bit of a cliffhanger, where there is a bit of like, oh, what's going on now? What's going to happen next? Ultimately though, the characters are so well developed, they're so likable, they're so interesting that by the time the end of the season comes, you're just so invested in them as a group, as a family. One of the things I think this show does really well is that at the end of the first season, it's very clear that things aren't going to be the same again. But by perhaps coincidentally giving Vanya, the character played by Ellen Page, amnesia, and having her forget everything, it means they can just brush by that and get straight into the action. They don't have to dwell on everyone trying to forgive each other. They don't have to dwell on what's happened in the past. They can just focus on getting everyone together, sorting out the big problem, moving on. And that works really well. Of course, they do actually dwell on that regard in certain elements, but it's never like a big part of the show, and I kind of like that, because that would have been the more expected traditional route to take. So by avoiding that, by doing something different, yeah, it does feel a bit corny, a bit coincidental that she did get amnesia, that she can't remember things, but it works really well. The performances across the board are brilliant. Again, I do think Klaus and Five are the standout characters. There are new characters introduced this season, new assassin characters called the Swedes, who don't say or do much. They're wearing bad wigs, I will say that, but they work well for what they're doing. There's a guy who's got like a fish tank for a head, and it's weird, but they don't explain that at all. I don't have a clue why there's this like telepathic fish, I think, who's running this like time travel agency. That's something they could do with explaining, but I don't think they're going to explain. There's some weird stuff in here, there's some funny stuff in here, there's some quirky stuff in here. I like this show a lot. And if you were turned off by the first season, I think maybe give it another go and watch this. If you watched the entirety of the first season, definitely continue watching it here. Final show I'm talking about today is Perry Mason, the 2020 version of Perry Mason, Season 1. It originally came out, and one of the reasons I decided I wanted to watch it is because it was a limited series. It was only going to be 8 episodes, all about the origins of the famous Perry Mason character who had a long-running TV show a long time ago. And so this is a reboot of sorts. Then about halfway through this season, they announced that, oh, it's not a limited series anymore because we're giving it a Season 2. And I was like, oh, that's a pleasant surprise, because I like this show quite a bit. This is a show that I feel like I've wanted for a long time, in that it's a old-fashioned classic noir style story with Hollywood noir style visuals and aesthetics and themes, attention to costumes and period details. You've got this like gritty, moody private investigator who's working for a lawyer. A child has been murdered after a kidnapping gone wrong. The mother is now being accused of stuff that maybe she did or didn't do. And yeah, it's all about how he goes from being this private investigator to being the famous lawyer. And the cast, it's Matthew Rhys from The Americans and A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. He's great. He does a really good job of conveying the emotions and the pressure that this character has to go through. The fact that by the end of the season, everything's kind of riding on him, and you get the sense that as the season progresses, he's getting more and more stressed out, he's getting more and more pressure, and he's having a hard time dealing with it all. He's having a hard time managing it all. And because it's all being dumped on his lap at a certain point, he does a really good job of conveying what that would be like, what that feels like, and that he's having a tough time with it all. And he's got all this other personal stuff going on in his life as well. So he's great in the lead role. This is a 1930s set detective noir / courtroom drama. So it's got everything that I would love from a TV show, basically. It's a HBO show, so the production values are high, everything looks great, everything sounds great, costumes are brilliant, the sets and locations are great and gorgeous. It looks like an old-fashioned like 40s, 50s noir movie. The use of lighting, the use of shadows. Perhaps it starts a bit too traditional in that it is, oh, this is just someone trying to make an old-fashioned noir movie, it seems like. But then it progresses and becomes much more of a courtroom drama. There are certain things that I don't think work well. The pacing, for example, is on the slow side. And there's nothing wrong with having a show that's on the slow side if it's giving you a lot to think about, but I don't think that's always happening here. Often I think this show's on the slow side and there's not a lot actually going on, particularly around the middle area. I think it does a good job of establishing the surprises and what's going on and setting up the story. And this isn't a whodunit kind of mystery, because we find out who done it right at the beginning. It's all about why they done it and how they done it, and figuring out how to get them for it. So it does a good job of setting that up and establishing the mysteries and building up the stakes as it goes on. It deals a lot with like gender politics and what's right and what's wrong, ethics and morality and corruption. It's tackling some very familiar themes, and like I said, the first episode, maybe the first 2 episodes, it feels like a very classic, very traditional noir, and I love that. But at the same time, I feel like they could have maybe pushed things a bit and tried something a bit more out there, a bit more different. So much so that a lot of the show and a lot of the story and a lot of what the characters are doing and saying and what the characters are, the character types that they are, do feel very traditional. The performances across the board are great. I like Shea Wiggum as the other private investigator. I like Chris Chalk as the black cop who is experiencing racism in the force, who is being looked down upon, who is being pressured to do certain things. And then you've got Tatiana Maslany as this religious icon slash leader. This is the element of the show which I don't think works well, and that it often feels shoehorned in. It often feels like they're giving this way too much attention than they need to, especially when at the end of the day it's got one main purpose, and that purpose becomes clear in the second last episode. I think the performance from Tatiana Maslany is great. She does a really good job of embodying this character who is representing this religion, who's representing this religious icon, mainly because she's being forced into it. She has very little control over what she says and what she does, and she's trying to break free, trying to be her own individual, and actually it's her mother who's pressuring her into doing all this. But a lot of this stuff doesn't feel like it needs to be there, and the whole religious stuff, the whole exploration of this church and this faith and what these people are doing, how they aren't as good as you would expect or want from a religious institution, it's pretty boring, to be honest. And overall, I think this show is good, but when it focuses in on certain elements like the religious institution, when it is going on a little on the slow side, it does struggle a little bit. But ultimately, it's a great origin story of how Perry Mason went from being a private detective to being a lawyer to really figuring out where his place in the world is, what really matters. I think it does a great job of exploring that, and I'm interested to see where season 2 goes. So, of the 3 shows I've discussed today, which one would I recommend? Well, if you've seen The Umbrella Academy Season 1, I would definitely recommend Season 2. I think it's worth checking out Perry Mason as well. If you're a fan of noir-style stories, if you're a fan of old-fashioned hardboiled detective stories or courtroom dramas, a good mystery or crime to sink your teeth into. It's not the best of that type ever made. It's not the most interesting of that type ever made, but it is very well done. It's just a little too traditional at times. And yeah, that's all I'm going to talk about today. And of course, if you like this content and you want more content like this, subscribe to my channel, click the bell to be notified when I post content like this, and of course go over to Twitter and Instagram, follow me at _Grant Burton. Until next time though, thanks for watching.